In 1945, a farmer named Muhammad al-Samam was digging for fresh soil in a northern Egyptian town called Nag Hammadi. He accidentally stumbled upon first a human skull and then an old jar full of leather-bound books. He took the jar home, and his mother apparently used some of the books for kindling for the fire before al-Samam considered that maybe they might be worth something. Sometime later, al-Samam became a suspect in the murder of someone his family had been embroiled in a blood feud with. So he gave the jar of books to a local Coptic priest for safekeeping until the investigation blew over. And it was the priest's brother who finally realized what an important discovery they had on their hands. So they sold the codices to the Coptic Museum in Cairo. And by the time they were all secured and processed by the Department of Antiquities, 52 books were discovered, bound in 13 leather volumes. Some of these books scholars had known about since antiquity, because they were quoted in our surviving sources. Some were totally new to us. The books, as we have them now, are written in Coptic, an Egyptian language, sometime after the year 348 of the Common Era. We know this date precisely because the leather bindings were strengthened with scraps of paper, some of which were receipts that had dates on them. But we have good reason to think that they were actually translations of much older Greek texts. So, what the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library revealed is that Christianity in the earliest centuries was incredibly diverse. You think it's hard now, to choose between the Methodists and the Baptists and the Presbyterians. If you were church shopping in the 3rd century, you could easily find a congregation that believed Jesus was a divine being who only appeared to take on human form, and another congregation that thought he was just a spiritual teacher and a prophet, but not in any sense divine. Some believed that there were two separate beings, a human Jesus of Nazareth and the divine Christ. You could find congregations that believed that Jesus' death on the cross brought about their salvation, and others that didn't believe Jesus' death had anything to do with their salvation. Some taught that Jesus never even died. You could even find Christian congregations that believed in two separate and competing divinities: the violent and vengeful God of the Old Testament, who created this evil world, and the loving and spiritual God of Jesus, who wants to save us from the world. So why didn't all these people just check the Bible to see what was the right thing to believe? The simple answer is, there was no Bible. Or more accurately, there were too many Bibles. Every one of these groups had its own set of sacred texts that developed and supported their beliefs. There was no official New Testament canon to check it against. Today, pretty much every Christian denomination and sect has the same list of books in their New Testament, but that wasn't always the case. So, how did we come to have an official list of New Testament books, and who decided which books would be on it? Even though they were still at this point about 250 years out from anything like a definitive Christian canon, the authors of some of the latest writings included in our New Testament today had already begun to think of at least some Christian writings as Scripture. Probably not their own. Who would be arrogant enough to think of their own book as Scripture? But the author of 2 Peter, for instance, who incidentally was not the Apostle Peter, it was written long after his death. Anyway, the author says that of Paul's writing, quote, "There are some things in them that are hard to understand," which I think we can all agree on that. And he says that, quote, "the ignorant and unstable twist them to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures." This means that the author of 2 Peter thinks of the writings of Paul as Scripture, even if they are a bit convoluted. So, pretty early on, Christians were thinking of some Christian writings as Scripture. But which writings? And who gets to decide? In his popular novel, The Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown convinced a lot of folks that the New Testament canon was imposed by the political machinations culminating in the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE that were concocted in part to cover up Jesus' secret family. None of that is true. The Council of Nicaea didn't attempt to list the books of the New Testament. The first list that we know of predates the council by more than 150 years. And the first list, with exactly the 27 books in our New Testament today and no others, is found in a letter sent from Athanasius, the bishop of Alexandria, to Christians in Egypt in 367 CE, so a generation after Nicaea. And there continue to be debates about this matter for decades after that. According to some scholars, like Elaine Pagels and Bart Ehrman, the books discovered by that farmer at Nag Hammadi may have belonged to the Cenobitic monks at the ancient Pabao monastery that was once located just 3 miles from where the books were discovered. According to this theory, the monks hid the books because they felt pressured by Bishop Athanasius' letter, and they didn't burn them because the canon was still in flux, and another bishop might have come along and have a different opinion. If that's what happened, then we can assume that other Christian bishops were similarly suppressing other forms of Christianity in other places. I, for one, think that this theory is a little bit sensationalist, even though I respect the scholars who propose it. Early Christian bishops like Athanasius just didn't seem to have that much power. They weren't like the medieval European bishops you see on HBO specials. Just because Athanasius made a proclamation about what books to read doesn't mean anybody had to listen to it. We tend to think of early Christianity as a battle between mainstream Orthodox and these fringe heretics. But the truth is, there just was no mainstream. And remember, the Nag Hammadi library was discovered at a gravesite next to a human skeleton. It was very common practice in the ancient world for people to be buried with their favorite stuff. It was especially common in Egypt to be buried with books about the afterlife. You've heard of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What if Nag Hammadi wasn't a conspiratorial cover-up at all? What if it was just the grave of a Christian Gnostic who wanted to be buried with his books? We may never know. What we do know is that the Bible didn't fall from heaven, bound in leather with your name etched in gold on the front cover. Both the 4th century Egyptian bishop Athanasius and the 16th century German reformer Martin Luther played crucial roles in deciding what books you think of as Holy Scripture. The Bible was constructed over centuries by blood and politics and spirituality, by powerful people and oppressed people. It came to you through a succession of people who agreed with those people and who disagreed with other Christians that thought of other books as Holy Scripture. So whatever we mean when we talk about the inspiration of the Bible has to be able to account for all of that activity and history.